And we are live. Greetings, salutations, and all that jazz. And welcome to a World Anvil World Building podcast. As always, you can find all of the information at worldanvil.com/podcast. And today we are talking about short story anthologies. What are they? Why are they? How do they work? And all things short story anthologies. But what is an anthology without a whole host of writers? And here they are. May I please welcome to the stage Kat, Trip Galey, and CL McCartney. Folks, how are you doing? Are you ready to get all anthologies?
So excited for this conversation.
Oh, yeah. I see a lot of nodding. I see a lot of smiling. I see a lot of eyebrows. It must be time. But just before we get there, let me introduce my guests properly because they are far too modest to do it themselves. First up, we have Trip Galey. Trip, coming to us from London, I believe.
Correct.
Yes. Do you want to tell us any more about...
Not on the ground of London.
No.
The waterways of London.
Trip Galey has taken to the waterways, people. Let me tell you a little more about him. He is a writer, a doctor of the academic persuasion, and a researcher of all things pursuant to bargains, exchanges, and compacts of a fairy nature. Smart to be on the water. I feel like you're somewhat protected from them, surrounded by iron and on the water. Very smart. It is inadvisable to attempt to make a deal with him, and now we know why. He is 1/3 of the small queer press Boner Books and 100% geek. May I say 100% awesome as well. You can find Trip in all the places right here in the link that I am sharing in the chat. And I'm so glad to have you here. Trip, tell us a little bit about your enthusiasm for short story anthologies. What do you love about them?
I love that you get sort of a number of variations on a theme. So if there's something that you really enjoy or really interested in, there's probably an anthology out there covering that thing. I grew up in the dark ages when there was very little science fiction and fantasy to be found on bookstore shelves, before the days of the mighty Zon. So yeah, I had to do it all the hard way. And quite often, the thing that you found that was new and different would be anthologies. Some of my favorites are edited by Esther Friesner, and they are feminist fantasy anthologies. It's the Chicks in Chainmail anthology series.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I'm already hooked. Chicks in Chainmail. Write it down, people. I'm looking this up. And speaking of write it down, people, and look it up later, this is Chris McCartney. C.L. McCartney is a writer of fantasy, and to his recent surprise, queer cosmic horror. His latest short story, most appropriately Red Flags, can be read in the forthcoming anthology. Yes, did I not pick them well? The Crawling Moon, Neon Hemlock, 2024. And with Trip, he co-founded Boner Books and is co-editing their LGBTQIA+ pulp anthology, I Want That Twink Obliterated, which is coming out this year, I believe. Very excited. What are you most excited for I Want That Twink Obliterated, Chris?
Okay, this is going to sound really weird, but one of the things is paying out the money. Because we've run this successful Kickstarter. Yeah, we've run this successful Kickstarter campaign. We've got all these like really excited audience members who they want the book, they want to read these stories, and we've gone out into the world and say, give us your cool, crazy pulp LGBTQIA+ ideas. Money has been thrown at us, stories have been thrown at us, and now we get to sort of give that money back to queer writers and be like, well done, here's some cash for writing your crazy queer stuff. And like that is going to be so satisfying. I'm waiting for that moment.
I'm so excited for you guys. I think you said June it was launching. Is that correct?
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Publishing is not an exact science, but fingers crossed. We're launching in June. And folks, you can find all of that. And you should go follow them at twitter.com/bonerbooks. Find that right here. And of course, last but certainly not least, we have the amazing Kat. We know her as Coffee Cut Cat over here in World Anvil, but her authorial name is Kat Bradbury, author of cozy fantasy and sci-fi with a dash of screwball comedy. Kat is published in daily science fiction, and her books include SPI Girls Kick Ass and the Alchemy Forever After series of Gaslamp fantasy fairy tale retellings. She's been featured in anthologies. Gosh, who'd have thunk, given the topic of today's live stream? Once Upon a Time Clockwork Tale, Gifts of the Magi, and Circuits and Steam. And if you would like to thank Kat for her wonderful work, both here at World Anvil and as an amazing author, you can go buy her a coffee over in Coffee. Why not? Fueled by coffee is our Kat, just like me. Girl after my own heart. Absolutely. Kat, Anthologies, what's the draw for you?
First of all, I have to show off, like, you get all the gorgeous, like, you know, they make pretty books. They make
for
such
those of
pretty
you
books.
On the podcast listening after the fact, Kat has just shown us an absolutely beautiful, may I say, chonker of an anthology that it's foiled and shiny and absolute reader bait. I would read that just seeing the cover.
I think maybe it's the ADHD in me, but I've always loved anthologies because they're this like little amuse-bouche menu of different stories on the same theme. I can remember being very young in like elementary, middle school, and getting the Alfred Hitchcock Presents anthologies of spooky stories for kids and things like that. So I love that anthologies bring all of these great stories together, and you don't have to read them all in all at once. You can kind of cherry pick and work your way through as with whatever attracts you, but also a really well done anthology often has like kind of a nice through line. There's definitely an art and a science to putting together a cohesive anthology that still feels like everybody gets to have their own voice, individual voice, and things like that. So yeah,
absolutely,
the variety is what appeals to me.
A buffet of experiences. All right, folks, let's dive in now. And just in case we have anyone who hasn't heard of them, can someone define for me what is an anthology, a short story anthology? Trip, what do you think?
So there are different collections of short fiction that you will get, but an anthology is usually a collected group of short fiction by different authors on a shared theme. As opposed to, one author putting out a collection of their work.
Yeah, absolutely. And how is that different from other forms of publishing, like publishing in magazines, Chris?
Well, I mean, so I guess there are sort of two bits there. One is, the function of it. Magazines have like specific regular audiences. They come out on a regular schedule. And they will tend to be most of the main magazines at the moment. They have like a vibe. They like certain sorts of stories, whether that's they'll gravitate towards like harder SF, or they're much more about the character and the emotion, and they'll take science fiction or fantasy. But you need that like they'll have like an editorial voice, I guess, but they won't be, as Trip says, like on a particular theme. Yeah. And then, sort of in a way, from the writer perspective, like what you normally find with magazines is like they're the stories that you've been wandering around and something occurs to you, like a short story pops into your head, and you type away and you get it, scrub it, but nice and perfect and polished, and you go, where can I send this? And then you look at the markets that are open, and you sort of approach the magazine that you might think might be most appropriate for it. What's quite interesting, exciting often about most anthologies, and you do get like best of year anthologies, which are different, but you've got an editor or a group of editors who have gone, we've got this idea, we've got this concept, we've got this sort of this thing that here's a prompt. What response does that elicit from you? And sometimes you'll have a story in your trunk, and you're like, I have something perfect for this. But a lot of the time, it's a bit more of it's a conversation with the editors. You're like, oh, no, that's a really cool idea for an anthology. I want to write something for that. So it's a bit more targeted. It can be a bit more specific.
Amazing. That's really, really clear. Thank you. How do anthologies differ as magazines, as writer markets, Kat? What do you think?
I think Chris just really kind of outlined that really well, is that like typically magazines, you are focused on the story, your big idea, and you shop around and try to find the fit in their editorial voice, in their submission requirements and things like that. Whereas an anthology, you're writing it fit for purpose. You're writing the story specifically for that anthology. Now you may shop that if you get rejected, you may shop that same story around to other magazines and things like that. But very often you found the call for submissions intriguing in some way, and that is what sparked the original idea for you to write that particular piece. Anthologies are very often more in physical print, I think, than a lot of the speculative fiction magazines are these days. So if it's important to you to see your work in physical print, then an anthology can be really great, because it's more likely to show up on bookshelves in your local booksellers, things like that. Also, I think that it differs from magazines in that they are, I think, often a little more welcoming, depending on the anthology, of you writing a story from your IP. Like if you have a larger IP, like novels and things like that, I typically see I've seen like Scott Lynch write stories from his world in an anthology, short stories. So they can be a little bit more of a cross-marketing purpose for that. Whereas I think in magazines, I think that's more generally frowned on. They want something that's purely standalone. As opposed to something that is a short story pulled from, although if you're, George R.R. Martin, I'm sure they'll make an exception. But
yeah, absolutely. For something that stands alone is more accepted for magazines, for sure. Very interesting. So Trip, you talked about how anthologies typically focus on a theme or a genre. What kinds of things are typical for that?
Certain fantasy tropes or kinds of stories. Back in the day, you would get like the fantasy detective right before, that became such a staple of the urban fantasy genre. I've seen anthologies built around tarot, around demonology, around sentient items. So there'll be a concept or something like that. I've seen anthologies like the Chicks in Chainmail. It's feminist science fiction and fantasy, particularly lampooning the chick in the chainmail with the great sword of the broadsword that became such a whatever things became before like memes existed. Just such an idea, a persistent idea throughout fantasy that it just was begging to be lampooned. So it's a concept, it's a prompt, it's a thing. I've seen an anthology about shoes, fairy tale retellings. You see so many fairy tale retellings. So it can be like a really broad sort of things. Like our anthology is based off a meme. Like I Want That Twink Obliterated. That is a classic meme, and it's like, how can we not make that an anthology? So really, it can be anything, but that it's something that ideally will spark an idea and will make people go, oh, I like that kind of thing, or oh, I want to read a book about those sorts of things, or something of that nature.
Very cool. Why do people publish anthologies? Chris, I'm giving this one to you because you guys are literally publishing an anthology. So we've talked about the writer side of it and a little bit about that. What's the goal of the person who's publishing the anthology?
I think, for most editors, it's just like, I want to manifest this thing in the world. And that takes on a lot of different forms. Like, there are like really lovely established small presses now that like they do an anthology every year. And I imagine that if you're on your like 6th anthology, you're kind of like, cool, it's an annual anthology. And they have a bit more of a kind of like, it's a thing that they do. And we've done this already and we've done that already. And they probably, I guess, is a slightly more professional. Professional is the wrong way to put it. But, it's more of a kind of like, there's a pipeline there. But I think most of the anthologies I see popping up, it's editors wanting to manifest something in the universe. It's like, oh God, I've not seen X, or there's not enough stories by this group of people. There was a great one, or what felt to be a great concept. I've now forgotten what it was called, but I'll look it up. That was basically it was an anthology that ran a Kickstarter last year for like polite horror, like so the horror of social nicety, kind of like
okay.
that. You know, there's a vampire at your door asking to come in, and you're a Midwestern housewife, and you can't be rude and say no. It, you know, and I think sometimes it's just like, oh, you could have a really cool collection of stories around that, and you know, as with Trip and I, it's like we wanted more specifically queer stories in the world. It's very difficult to get like own voices queer stuff trad pub still. It's easier now, but it's still hard. Queer concerns are more niche than sort of broad audiences concerns, or at least that is a perception. And if you go, right, I'm an editor, I'm making this decision, we're going to create this anthology, then you can choose what's relevant. So it's a way of like forcing the issue, either like on a kind of big political purpose, I'm going to make this my voice heard scale, or in a, I really, really love cozy fantasy with fairies looking for lost cats and I want more of them. You know, and yeah.
Amazing. I love that. And Kat, I think you're the perfect person to answer this. On the other side, what are some of the benefits of submitting to anthologies as a writer?
For one thing, it's a good way to get exposure. Like I said, some of the when you're allowed to use it as sort of a teaser for your, you know, a longer series or things like that, it can be a great opportunity to get your work in front of people who wouldn't otherwise see it. I know that ECC Books has mentioned it is really good. You can build up a good solid following just from doing some quality anthologies and things like that. It's also good networking, honestly, because it's expected that the authors involved in an anthology are going to all co-promote, so you can kind of meet other writers who kind of write in your vein and in your vibe and things like that. It's also kind of a way, and this is me putting my marketing hat on, to test market trends and things like that with a low lift. Like if you think that, I know that when I was in Once Upon a Clockwork Tale, I am fairly sure that small press publisher was expecting steampunk to take off in a really big way, but before she committed to acquiring a bunch of novels in that genre, putting out an anthology was a good way to kind of test the waters and see if this is going to break as big as I think. Does it have the appeal that I think it's going to have, that kind of thing. So I think it's a good opportunity if you're a career author and you're planning your next series or your next, especially for getting into like subgenres and trends and things like that. I think it can be a good opportunity to, like, if it's that little like canary in the coal mine of the market to see, like, and you haven't written an entire novel, or worse yet, an entire trilogy of novels before you find out whether there's an actual appetite for that kind of story. So I think there are a lot of different benefits to being in. Like I said, it builds your network of fellow writers who write the same kind of thing you do. It establishes your bona fides really well. And like I said, it can be a lower effort way to test out a new genre or a new trend that you think you might be curious about investing more time in, but you want to see if it's going to be worth the effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And also worth the effort. Fun. Is it fun to do more of this? Do I feel like I've got more of this in me? A short story is a very good way to experiment in, like, splash around in the shallow end of a pool of a theme or a genre, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like Chris and Trip can speak on this in detail, but I'm going to throw this one open to the floor. Common submission guidelines for anthologies. Guys, I will just, before anybody else gets in with this, whatever the submission guidelines are, read them carefully and follow them. You may be a wonderful writer, but nobody is so special that you will not get thrown out the slush pile for not following the submission guidelines. So what kinds of submission guidelines can we expect to see for anthology submissions? What do you say, Chris?
I mean, like there's a chunk of like really standard ones, and I feel like offering this advice is a bit like saying read the exam paper before you set an exam. It's like, yeah, there will be a word count. Follow it. There will be like almost always they will say use standard manuscript format. I was surprised by the number of people who submitted not in manuscript format. I thought that was like really ubiquitous and everyone knew. Apparently they don't. You get sort of often you'll get boundaries set in terms of like maturity of content that will probably be in there. Again, that's worth checking out. If they're like, no, we don't want any gratuitous violence, and you have a beheading halfway down page 1, then either you wasted your time submitting or you wasted your submission because the beheading wasn't necessary and you could cut it. I think it's also worth reading because you'll probably get there'll often be like preferences these days, so it's not like submission, they're guidelines, sometimes some of it's it must be no longer than 4,000 words, in which case pay attention. But I think increasingly you often find sort of the editors going, we quite like italics as italics, because for those in the audience not familiar, standard manuscript format is this very specific thing, the way of laying out short stories and manuscripts that evolved, I think, during the typewriter era, when you were sending in physical manuscripts and editors were like writing comments on physical manuscripts. So for example, they have nice big margins and it's double spaced so you can write notes, and it's a monospaced font called Courier and all these sorts of things. And one of the standard things is that rather than writing italics, you do an underline. That's like old school manuscript format, you underline. But increasingly, it's one of those things that there's a sort of like modern manuscript format is now accepted by a lot of editors, and they would say, just use real italics. It's fine. It's nicer to read. We're all reading it on a computer anyway. And you probably won't get, kicked out of consideration because you didn't pay attention to that. But editors are human beings. They're probably reading dozens of stories at a time. Making their life easy will help you. If they have a nice reading experience, reading your story because you've formatted your story how they said they like your story to be formatted, that will help.
Yeah. Chris is saying this is a man who has waded through a slush pile. Go ahead, Trip.
Sorry, I just want to jump on that very quickly because we are in the internet age. People express themselves and compose writing very differently now than 15, 20 years ago. Blog sort of format is very common. It's very easy to internalize that sort of thing. But like if you're reading, yes, if you're on the internet, if you're scrolling down a blog, it's great if your paragraphs are separated by an extra space and don't have an indentation. That's fine. If you're reading a short story in fiction, that's bad. That makes it harder for us to read. Indent your paragraphs. Use punctuation at the end of all your sentences because it can really change the meaning. It can be very confusing. And a confused editor is an editor who's going to be like, next. We had nearly 200 submissions to I Want That Twink Obliterated. And we were only able to take 9, maybe 10. Like, if I, with my editor hat on, see something like that, I'm like, no, this is going to be too much work. No, next. I did the initial read on every single one of these things. And quite frankly, with 200 things to read, if I saw something that was like, no, this is too difficult for me to read. This is too messy. No, next. We are looking for reasons to clear that slush pile because it is massive and you can drown in it. And the one other thing I think that is really important to hit in terms of submission guidelines are sim subs and multi subs. So that's simultaneous submissions and multiple submissions. Because not all editors are okay with all of these things. So simultaneous submissions means that editor is okay with you submitting to this anthology and sending your piece to other magazines or to other anthologies at the same time. Simultaneous submission. If they say it's okay, that's what that means. If they say it's not okay, don't do it, because there is nothing more frustrating and more annoying to an editor than finding that story that they really, really want and then discovering, oh, no, it's been sold to someone else like 2 days before. Editors,
they will never buy a story from you again.
Yeah, no, they remember that sort of shiz. Don't do it. Now, multi-subs, multiple submissions. Sometimes you see this, sometimes you don't. Multi-subs means you are allowed to send that editor more than one story at a time. This is great for the writer. This can be terrifying for the editor. You do not see it very often, but if there's a limited submission window and the editor wants to make sure that there are full opportunities for people who might have multiple ideas, or that they are thinking, maybe we want a few more submissions to choose from, they might open the story up to multi-subs. But very carefully check. Simultaneous submissions, multiple submissions, are they allowed, yes or no? And then stick to it. I want that twink obliterated. We did not allow multiple submissions. Guess what? We did have 2 individuals send us more than one piece. It was very easy to just skip over that second piece because there were 200 of them to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. Kat, any common submission guidelines or maybe uncommon submission guidelines that you've seen before?
I was briefly a partner in a small press, and I know that there are some small press, especially small press publishers, who put in unusual items in their submission request just to see, that is a test to see if you actually read it. It is not about what the actual rule is. It's a test to see if you actually read it and can follow instructions. And it's an objective measure because, as Trip said, you get hundreds, and like sometimes it's really hard to make a subjective judgment. So if there's one objective thing that you can say that like this person followed the sub-guides and this person didn't, then that's the tiebreaker because they objectively didn't do it. And the other thing is you're starting a relationship with this person, and it's a business relationship, and if they can't follow instructions, or if they think that they don't have to follow the rule, that they're super special and their story is super special and they should not have to follow the rules, then when time comes for you to like make edits that you feel like you need to make to get it into, then their perfect little story didn't need to follow the submission guidelines and also doesn't need your edits. So it's just a little tiny red flag or yellow flag, at least, that this might not be the easiest person to work with, either because they can't follow instructions or they have trouble with that, or they won't. So yeah, sometimes it's not about what the actual submission guideline is. It's about whether or not you respect it.
Yeah, absolutely. What makes an anthology successful in terms of readers and sales? Kat, I'm going to bump this to you first because you are our marketing brain. What are your thoughts on this one?
I think some of it is due diligence and keeping your finger on the pulse of the market and seeing what's being bought especially in terms of tone, in terms of theme, in terms of things that are like the plus. It's pulp plus queer-owned voices stories. That's a beautiful combination. I think people are always looking for the same but different in their media, and that includes books. And so if you can mix and match two things that they already like, it's the Reese's Cup thing. It's like if you take two things that they like that don't normally go together and put them together, then that becomes suddenly very appealing in an interesting way, because it is that same but different thing that audiences are looking for. I mean, obviously there are tools and things out there that you can use to kind of keep an eye on the market and see like what keywords and what books are selling really well right now. But it's actually kind of difficult to do that with an anthology, because short story readers are not necessarily novel readers all the time. And sometimes the trends for books and novels can be very misleading if you're in the short story market. It's much better to kind of, honestly, this is where magazine submissions are very helpful, because if you if you go and check like Beneath Ceaseless Skies or Locus or all of these, or Clark's World, and just see what they're publishing lately, they're probably acquiring stuff that people aren't burnt out on, that like people are excited and asking for more of, things like that. So you can keep. It's much more important to watch magazines for the trends in short stories than it is to watch novels. But and it's really hard to know when people are over something. Like Mermaids had like this brief moment of glory and then they burned out real fast. So
what you're saying is they dove beneath the waters again.
They did dive beneath, to disappear forevermore. So and it's hard to know. I want to go back to the Jerry Maguire, like it's all popcorn in the in the pan. Some will pop and some won't.
What has been your experiences with this trip as somebody who's putting together an anthology, making it successful in terms of attracting readers and sales? Because you guys kickstarted your anthology, so a lot of the sales are already done with regard to that, right?
One thing we saw that definitely helped was we had a core group of anchor authors who are well-known names that are established in their own right, that have some who have links to the anthology because I don't know, they originated the meme. So if you like, that's one of the nice things about anthologies. You can knock boots with really famous names and be on the table of contents right after a big name, and that big name will draw in some audience. Although we definitely found that like the concept also needs to be there. So like fun concepts, big names, things that people don't get enough of or haven't seen as much of. All seem to contribute.
There's one thing that I did find interesting, and I'll throw this in here because I don't think it's a point you will probably ever hear anywhere else, is that like in terms of like the anthology being successful, yes, like those anchor authors were really, really important. And because we were running a Kickstarter, we were effectively doing pre-sales. Actually, the reach of those authors was incredibly important. The many of the bigger authors, like they put out a tweet, they did an Instagram story, and it got a lot of engagement. And but we could sort of see in the metrics on Kickstarter like where the referrals were coming from, and that was really interesting. But actually, how they were doing it also really mattered. I mean, this will be in terms, I'm sure, for Kat and Janet, this is grandmother being taught to suck eggs territory. But we certainly had some big name authors who did very like minimum effort promo. Like they put out a tweet, they reposted something, and then we had much smaller authors, often with, say, like very dedicated followings, who are like, oh my God, I'm so excited to be in this anthology. It's really, really cool. I really want you to... They personalized it. They sort of sold it to their audience, and they got so much more engagement out of it. And whilst, obviously, as an editor, I'm sitting here going, this anthology is, it's meritocratic. We're reading the slush pile. We want, we want the best stories, etc. That is all true. A little voice at the back of my head was going, they were a really good person to have on the anthology. Like they were a great author. They helped. And it's possibly worth just saying to the audience that, like, if you write a story, you submit it to anthology, you get your story accepted, it might be useful not to consider that your work is now done. Like we're all trying to lift each other up here. We want to put out a book. You want a story in a book. It's a collective endeavor. And if editors are like, oh no, they're both great, I love their work, And it's really good to have them in an anthology because they have a dedicated audience who buy things. Like that's sort of, it doesn't hurt.
Anthologies are a team sport, is what I'm hearing
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
All right, so our listeners are now convinced about anthologies. They want to be on the team. They want to be part of the book. How can writers stay informed about anthology submission calls? Where do you go to find out when somebody has a book they're looking for stories for?
There's
Cat
a
Submission Grinder.
Yes. Submission Grinder, Submittable, all of the usual places.
Duotrope.
Duotrope is also very good. All of the socials where, writers gather and do the things. Also, writer groups, because a certain number of anthologies are by design marketing materials for, like, if I'm recalling correctly, like there was a group of writers who like created a new genre with women's paranormal fiction. Like they decided this is a thing that should exist. It's slightly different than what's out there. And they all got together and created an anthology that tied to all of their books. So like, it was very calculated, but it worked. So like, they kind of, Kickstarters is another place where sometimes, even if the anchor writers, the famous names are already attached, they reserve some space for, emerging writers and things like that. So, and yeah, just your writer groups, things like that. If you're on Codex, sometimes, you'll see calls for sub there. So, yeah.
Also, follow the people that put out these anthologies. Frequently, they will be repeating. Neon Hemlock Press does a fantastic anthology every year. I think they recently just had another Kickstarter for one. Zombies Need Brains. They do 3 anthologies every year. They kickstart in the fall, and then submissions are open like for a few months until the end of the year. And then the next year they will publish three fantastic anthologies. And they do it every year. It's reliable. So once you get a sense of sort of the publishing houses, the small presses, the editors that put these things out regularly, check their socials, check their websites, things like that. They will often do them around the same time, so you can actually anticipate and schedule, and yeah, it's great.
Amazing. Okay, so our audiences, they've learned about anthologies now. They've learned how to find anthologies. As a pair who's just sorted through a gigantic slush pile, what makes a short story stand out to an anthology editor? Trip, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so a lot of the general wisdom in terms of writing short stories still applies. Your opening needs to be on point. I was generous. I gave like a page, 2 pages for the writers to grab me. A lot of editors will give you like a paragraph, 2 paragraphs maybe. So your opening, it needs to be on point. It needs to be tight. Do not take time. Don't waste time faffing about. Start your story. Get moving. Beyond that, you want, with anthologies particularly, you want to hit the brief. Just today, I sent out at least half a dozen rejections for I Want That Twink Obliterated, where the story was great, the prose was on point, we laughed, we cried, we really enjoyed the story, but it didn't fit the brief. Like, it's a great story. I kind of want to put it in there, but it's not pulpy, twinky, like sci-fi. It doesn't fit the brief. So fit the brief. Do all the short story stuff that you normally need to do. And yeah. Oh, yeah. Also, it's good if you can hit the brief and do so with sort of like your second, third, or maybe fourth idea. Because we did see, you will see trends when you're looking through anthologies like this. I'm like, yes, we have 7 noir detective stories in the pulp anthology, and that's great. But we're only going to put 1 noir detective story in the anthology, so you need to bring something extra. If it's like, yeah, We had a bunch of sword and sorcery stories. We had a bunch of detective stories. Like, we're only putting 1 or 2 of each of these things into this anthology. You can't just have, oh, queer sword and sorcery. You have to have queer sword and sorcery, but it's this thing and this thing as well. Like, yeah, like, it's not enough. I'm sorry, this sounds like so much stuff, but yes, you have to hit the brief, but that's not enough. You have to hit the brief and give it a little extra pizzazz, and you need to catch my attention in the first 2 paragraph stops.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's a competitive market, and these are important things for potential writers of anthology stories to know. Like, knowing how to succeed is critical, and sometimes that's hard, but at least you know what you're trying to do, right? How about you, Chris? What really made a story shine for you when you were reading through the slush pile?
I mean, partly, as Tripp says, it is that, like, all the normal guidance on short stories still applies. The ones that grabbed me were the ones with great opening lines. They were the ones that just had an incredibly strong sense of voice out of the gate. I think almost for me, actually, that's almost always it. Like, I will give you so much more time to, like, make sense. Like, I'm not quite sure what you're doing, but I'll go with it. You know, and it's because there's something. It's like, this is not like everything else I've read. That, because again, this is like, it's funny. This is advice I give when mentoring about, like, doing job applications, but the same thing is true. Is that, like, you need to bear in mind that the person reviewing your short story has, like, read 20 million of them. You know, it's the stuff that, like, you know, keep thinking about which idea you want to work up into a short story until you get to the one you're like, oh yes, that's the one that does the thing with the thing, and that makes me excited, because the editor will have exactly the same reaction, and that's where you know you've got the good shit. And then aside from that, I think it's really difficult to. Sorry, I'm basically just repeating everything Tripp said, but it's horrible to sort of advise people it's 7-dimensional chess. You need to be like, okay, so, like, everyone's going to be submitting X, so I need to do X, but then I'll just, like, twist it at the end. But it is that. Like, and I you know, like, honestly, having sat there, having read through all of it, it's when you get to the, oh, I didn't see that coming. Oh, I thought this was exactly like all the other ones that I've read, but it's not. You know, it's the thing that excites you. It's the thing that gets your blood pumping. You're like, oh no, I absolutely have to put this in the anthology because it's so cool, because it's so on brief. Because, you know, that's really hard to execute. And I would still always go back to, like, fundamentally, you know, tell the story you have faith in and tell it as well as you can, and have trust in your abilities as a writer, because, you know, you can get completely lost attempting to play, like, 7-dimensional chess and third guessing and fourth guessing yourself and the editor. But yeah, if you, like, have that idea that you're like, oh, I don't think anyone else is going to have occurred. That's going to occur to anyone else, and I think that's pretty perfect. Then that one, do that one.
Yeah, I'm sort of hesitating to say this, but it's sort of a general feeling I have, and this certainly applies to anything you submit to Bona Books. You can go further than you think you can. Push further. Do something audacious or weird, because I can guarantee if you go down my notes, when you get to, like, the really weird one where it's like that this just opened and this person did this thing with that in this way. Okay, boys, you need to read this one. Like, I don't know if it's going in, but you need to read this one.
Be the one that stands out, essentially, is what I'm hearing here. Yeah,
but do it well. Like, everything Chris said still applies. Like, yeah. Do it well. Don't throw in, like, pointless sensationalism. Like, make sure it's grounded and key to the story and the art that you're creating. But you can go further. Like, we're we're flipping fantasy readers. Like, we're already like pushing out beyond the boundaries of the real. Like, part of the reason we love fantasy is the new, the unexpected. So yeah, push your boat out further.
I love that. Kat, any thoughts on this one?
I just have some very boring advice, which is spend almost as much time on your title as you do on the actual story, because your title has to carry so much weight. It kind of connects to what Trip was saying about, like, you have to catch the editor and the reader really fast. Your story doesn't start with your first line of your story. Your story starts with the title. It should be selling your story and starting the story before they even get started. And titles are incredibly hard to get right. But especially, I think, in an anthology, your one-word title that is evocative and creates curiosity is not going to work. You need a title that, like, kicks off the story with a bang before they even really start reading the story. And the other thing is that, and this is in the, thank you for linking the blog post. The short story writing in general, it's the structure of a joke. It's a setup and then a surprising payoff at the end. And we've talked a lot about how the beginning has to grab people, and you spend a lot of time on that beginning. But that end piece, that's where you punch people in the gut. The emotional impact is almost always at that surprise at the end of a short story. If you don't have that setup, curiosity build, surprising reversal, then you may just have a vignette. You may not have an actual short story. And like I said, all of the emotional impact comes from, like, this didn't go the way I thought it was going to, or, oh, I didn't see that coming. That's what makes the story stick in their mind. And if you've got the title that is evocative and that gut punch at the end, then that's what's going to, like, help your story rise to the top, whether it's for an anthology or for a magazine. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would just jumping on that, like, on reflection, sorry, because Trip and I basically had our editorial meeting with Robert at the weekend to basically, like, decide the table of contents and work out who we were going to accept, which was why Trip's been sending out rejections. And as a wild generalization, I would say opening well, like, got you onto our shortlist, and ending well got you into the anthology. Like, on reflection, that's what we were cutting. Like, when we were down to, like, we have 9 slots and 15 stories, like, the ones with all the weakest endings went, and that's what it was.
Yeah, the ones that missed the punchline, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, folks, with just a few minutes left, I've got to ask you final advice for our hopeful short story writers who want to publish in anthologies. I'm going to go Kat, Chris, Trip. Kat, what are your thoughts?
Go all the way in on the theme. Let the theme be your starting point, because it's tempting to hedge your bets and say, I'm going to write this maybe for this anthology, but I want to keep my options open to, like, sub it out elsewhere. Don't do that. Go all in. Follow the brief, like Trip said, and go all in on this as if it's not going to go anywhere else. So, because otherwise, if it's not the perfect story, the essential story for this anthology, then you're doing yourself a disservice, because you're giving another writer the opportunity to jump ahead of you in line.
Very good advice. Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
My actual answer would be exactly what Kat just said. So
Fair advice for that, Kat.
Yeah. So I will just jump to the side and give a bit of advice that hasn't been said already, which is, bear in mind that unlike novellas or novels, short fiction anthologies, they're normally put together by, like, tiny teams, and they are assuming basically that you'll have to do almost no editorial work. Like, they will buy a story and it needs to just go into the anthology. Because I want that twink obliterated, like, part of our aim is that we're trying to, like, lift up historically marginalized voices to an extent. We've actually been we've deliberately been a bit more sort of generous, and we've accepted a couple of stories that weren't quite there, and we're hoping to sort of, bring the writers along with us, because we think that's really important. If a lot of editors and magazines and anthologies do not have the time or the resource to do that. So, if like I'm looking over a story going, this is really, really good, it needs a really thorough copy edit, that's going to be enough to dig. Even if it's like brilliant, even if it's got a fantastic concept, it's got a great opening line, the story fundamentals are all there, but the attention to detail isn't, that could be a problem. So just like bear in mind that short fiction, the assumption is that like the thing that you submit is almost like 99%, that's what's getting published.
Absolutely. Trip, what are your thoughts on this? Final advice for our hopefuls.
We've covered so much, and we've like tossed out so much already, and Chris took mine. So I'm just gonna reiterate what I said earlier. Like, be bolder, go further, grab your editor's attention in the first line, and do not flipping let it go until you finish. Great promise, deliver on it, and never, ever be boring. That is the greatest crime. Do not be boring.
Never be boring. I love that. I'm going to throw in one of my own, if that's okay. I used to be a professional opera singer. Part of that job is getting used to rejection, because no matter what role you want to sing, there's 250 other sopranos who want to sing it as well, and they are just as good as you are, and their CVs look almost identical, and they've shown up in a beautiful dress, and they've shown up with the aria polished. It's exactly the same with short stories. Your short story can be absolutely perfect, but it's not to the taste of the people who are looking at it, and that is okay. And especially, as Trip says, if you go bold, if you make some bold choices and you write something that is interesting and 100% you and super awesome, it doesn't detract from its awesomeness if it's not to the taste of the people putting together the anthology. That just means it's banana flavored and they prefer strawberry, and that is okay. So get used to the idea that you can write something that is absolutely wonderful and it will not get chosen, and that is part of the business. And as Kat was saying, you write 100% for the thing that you are writing for, and you go full tilt at it. And then if it doesn't get in, you say, okay, where else can I send this? It's still a great story, even if it wasn't the perfect fit for that anthology. Where else can I put this? Because as Chris was saying, it can be like there were 7 noir stories and they had to pick one, and yours was also awesome, but they had to pick one, and they liked the strawberry flavored one, not the apricot flavored one. Go ahead, Chris.
If you do that, and that's fantastic advice, listen to Janet. If you've written something specifically for like a big anthology that like gets a load of submissions, and they reject it, put it in a trunk, like just ignore it for like 6 months, 9 months, because if there was like an anthology for Lovecraftian noir detectives and you got your story rejected, then suddenly every single magazine is going to have so many submissions of Lovecraftian detective stories.
It's like the tidal wave after the earthquake.
Yes, timing is very important.
Yeah, the editors talk about this regularly. Like, oh, must have been another fairy tale retelling anthology because I've just been swamped with Cinderella stories.
For those in the podcast, everybody on the screen is now currently dying of laughter because this is such a well-known phenomenon in the publishing business.
And specifically fairy tales. I feel like it must be quarterly. Like, well, it's April. All the fairy tales are out.
Fairy tales are in season again. I can hear them blooming like a poisoned apple.
No.
Oh, goodness.
Vampires are every other year, but fairy tales?
Fairy tales come out every spring. Oh, goodness. All right, folks. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and hopefully for you listening, you have a better idea of what anthologies are, how you can apply for them, how you can find them, and a little bit about kind of the written and unwritten rules that you should be aware of. Folks, introduce yourself for the last time in one sentence or fewer. Chris, you're up.
Sorry, is this a new feature? What do I have to... What?
Oh, let's get him. Chris, who are you and where can we find you?
I'm Seal
No, we broke
McCartney,
Chris.
and you can find me on socials mostly as Chris_McCartney. And yes, I've been trailing red flags. There's a forthcoming story in the Crawling Moon anthology from Neon Hemlock for what feels like forever, because this is another useful educational thing about anthologies, is that they're often published by small presses that normally have teams of like 1 or 3. And so they have erratic publication schedules. So I'm still trailing the same forthcoming thing, and probably will the next time I come on. But fingers crossed.
Excellent. Trip, who are you and where can we find you?
I'm Trip Galey. Go to Linktree/Trip Galey, and you can find me on all the places. I am the author of A Market of Dreams and Destiny, and yes, that book is guilty of having strong fairy tale influences as well. But if you like really weird, creepy, fey contracts and alternate Victorian Londons, maybe give it a look.
Have read is excellent. And finally, Kat, who are you and where can we find you?
I am Kat Bradbury, the Kat Bradbury most places. I am on Ko-fi. There should be a newsletter starting up there very soon. And I'm also around the Discord and part of World Anvil as Coffee Cup Cat, scribe of the web. So I'm around.
She's around and she's awesome. And I've been your host, Janet Phillips. You can find me at World Anvil pretty much all over the internet. I write things. All right, folks, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. And, well, it's Adventure April, so what are you going to do? Go write a short story, go find your anthology set to it, grab your hammer, and go world build. See you all soon, guys. Bye!